Okay, we're going to do a review of functions. This is going to be part 1. We're going to analyze this graph, and then in part 2 we're going to do another thing. So you might want to watch both of those. Alright, so the first question here, looking at this graph, we're asking, is it a function? Well, remember, a function has to pass the vertical line test, and that means that none of the x values can repeat. And so yes, this one does that. Okay, so for domain, remember, those are the x values. So what x values does this graph carry? Well, you always read it like a book, so we're going to start. The first x value that we come to is right here, and that is at -9. But notice that's an open hole, so that means that -9 is not included. So for writing that in interval notation, that is with parentheses. Then if you keep reading, we keep going on to all these x values down here. Well, we end up with this arrow, so that means it just keeps going. So that is to infinity. And range is our y values, so we're going to read that from the least to the greatest. So bottom coming up, that first y value that we hit is at -8. And since that's touching -8 and it's a solid line, that means that -8 is included. The last y value that we hit is going to be right here at +6, and that one's also included, so we use a bracket. Okay, so I'm going to erase that information. Because some of this other stuff you're going to want to see. Okay, so what is f of 0? Well, that means x is equal to 0. So when x is equal to 0, we're along this y-axis, we're along the y-axis here, and the only point that it crosses that graph is right here. So when x is equal to 0, then y is -7. Alright, so what is f of -1? Well, that means when x is equal to -1, which would be right along this line, it's right there. Y is -4. And this one's written different. Where is f of x equal to -1? Well, remember, f of x means y. So when y is at -1, we are right here. Well, notice it touches twice. Once right here at -5, and then also right here at -2. So you've got two answers for that. Alright, so the number 7 is asking us if the function that's drawn here is 1-to-1. Well, do you remember that 1-to-1 means that it's got to pass that vertical line test, but it also has to pass the horizontal line test in order for it to be 1-to-1. That means the x values can't repeat, nor can the y values repeat. Well, on this one, notice these y values are repeating. So it is a function because x values aren't repeating, but it is not 1-to-1 because those y values repeat. So we're going to say no to that one. Number 8 is asking us, where is f of x equal to 0? Well, remember, that means when y is equal to 0, what is x? Well, y is equal to 0 along that x-axis, so we've got this one, and we also have this point. This is not a point because it is not touching that. It's going to be everything up to that -9, but it does not include that -9 because it's that open hole. So our only 2 is at -6 and at -3. Alright, give the intervals where f is increasing. Well, remember, we always read these graphs from left to right like you're reading from a book. So it is increasing when this part is going up. So that's going up right there. Notice this part here is going up, and then over here this is going up. This is all going up until it levels off. So we're going to write all those intervals down. So the first one here starts at -9. and it goes up to, it increases up to the point 6. Then the next time it starts increasing is right here at -5, and it goes up to -3. And then the last point that it starts increasing is at +1. And then notice this is increasing up to here, but it also is increasing here. It's just at different rates. But at this point, it levels off, so it's not increasing anymore after 6. So those are all the points that it's increasing. So now the second question is asking, where is it decreasing? Well, that's the same thing. We're going to read it left to right. It's going to decrease here, and then it's also decreasing in this area. All right, so what are those values? Again, we're starting at -8, and we're going decreasing all the way down to this point where it the curve changes. So that's at -5. And then we change again here at -3, and it decreases all the way down to +1. So those are the points where the graph is decreasing. Okay, let me erase all this again. Alright, so where is f of x less than or equal to 0? So that means, where is y less than or equal to 0? Where are the y values? Well, everything below this line, y is negative. So what are those intervals to where it's less than 0? Well, it's less than 0 from -6 to -3, those 2 points. And, oh, never mind. It's less than or equal to, so since that's equal to 0, that's included, so all of this actually is less than 0, so that should just go to infinity. Sorry about that. So it's less than 0 from -6. All of this is below that line or touching that line because it's also equal to it, so that goes to infinity. All right, so the next one that we're going to look at is analyze the equation x plus 2 over x squared plus x minus 6. So what is the domain of this g of x? Well, remember, it can be a domain or your x values. And remember, whenever we're dealing with these rational expressions, which means these complicated fractions, we cannot have that denominator equal to 0. So we're going to factor this bottom part. And that should factor into x plus 3, x minus 2. 3 times -2 is -6. Add them together, you get 1. Well, remember, if you set both of those equal to 0, then you're getting x is equal to -3, and then that one's x is equal to 2. Okay, so either one of those would make this denominator 0, which is what we cannot have. So we're going to say x cannot be -3 or +2. All right, so remember, now we're going to find our x-intercepts and our y-intercepts. So the x-intercept is when y is equal to 0. Well, if y is equal to 0, then really all you're left with is the numerator. And so let me just show you how that would work. So if we set y equal to 0, and we have x plus 2 over x squared plus x minus 6. Well, we would multiply both sides by this denominator in order to get rid of it, which would just be 0. So then you're just left with 0 is equal to x plus 2, because that would, once I multiply that to get it off from the denominator there, it would all be 0 on the other side. So x would be equal to -2. So that is your x-intercept. Now your y-intercept, remember, that's when x is equal to 0. So if we look at that equation and we say 0 plus 2 over 0 squared plus 0 minus 6, all we're really left with are those constants. So 2 over -6, we can reduce that to -1/3. So that's where our y-intercept is. And hopefully this is coming back to you and it's just a review. Okay, so what is g of -5? Well, that means x is -5. So we're going to plug it into the equation. G of -5 then is -5 plus 2 over -5 squared plus -5 minus 6. Okay, well, -5 plus 2 is -3. So on the bottom we have -5 squared is 25 minus 5 minus 6. Well, that comes out to be -3 over 14. And that should be our final answer. -3/14. So the next one, where is g of x equal to 1? Well, remember that means like the y is 1. So we're going to set this equation equal to 1 and then solve for x. Okay, well, if I multiply both sides by the denominator, x squared plus x minus 6, I'm saying that's just times that 1. So x squared plus x minus 6 is equal to x plus 2. Well, remember, in order to factor these, it all has to be equal to 0. So we're going to subtract our x. That's going to give us x squared. We're not going to have any x's. Then we'll subtract our 2 out. So that's minus 8 is equal to 0. All right, well, let's see. We're going to move that 8 to the other side. So we've got x squared is equal to 8. And we're going to take the square root. So x is equal to the square root of 8, which we rationalize those to square roots of 2. Or you can use a calculator on that, that's fine. Alright, so what is g of -x? Alright, so we're going to stick -x in for each x. And that's going to be -x plus 2 over -x squared minus the x minus 6. Okay, so let's just simplify that as much as we can. -x plus 2 over x squared minus x minus 6. That's all that we can really do to that, so it is finished. Well, this one is just what is -g of x, which means -y, right? So -g of x is equal to x plus 2 over x squared plus x minus 6. Well, all we're really doing is dividing by that -1. So -g of x, which really should put that because it's like we're dividing by that -1, is really just -x minus 2 over the x squared plus x minus 6. So that's the final answer there. Alright, hopefully that's helping you remember some of this information about functions, and you're able to do that review.